there. It's always a good day when we get to dive into stuff like personal growth and spirituality. And this book you've been exploring, Electroespiritualidad, talk about a unique approach. It's not every day you see someone using electrical circuits as a metaphor for inner life.
It's intriguing, right? It's like a Dr. Flores saying, forget the fluffy stuff. Let's talk about your personal energy grid. And, sometimes those unexpected analogies help us see familiar things in a whole new light.
Totally. So for anyone listening who's new to this whole electrospiritualidad thing, what's the big idea here?
In essence, it's about using the principles of electricity to understand our emotional, mental, and spiritual selves. And it's not just about understanding, it's about using that knowledge to make positive changes in our lives. Think of it as rewiring your internal circuitry for greater happiness and fulfillment.
I love that analogy. So where does Dr. Flores even begin with this?
Well, right off the bat, in Chapter 1, he throws you into the deep end. He compares a person to an electrical circuit. We've got these different currents flowing through us. Emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, each one essential.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this metaphor works. We've all felt that sense of being overloaded or burnt out, like our circuits are overloaded.
Exactly. And just like a frayed wire can cause a whole system to short circuit, neglecting any of these currents in ourselves can lead to problems. But here's a key point Dr. Flores makes. While our physical and mental circuits have their limits, our spiritual core is far more resilient. It doesn't break down as easily. But here's the catch.
Don't leave me hanging. What's the catch?
It can be overshadowed, almost like it's on a dimmer switch. We get so caught up in the day-to-day, the demands on our time and energy, that we forget to nurture that spiritual side.
And that resonates so much with what you're looking for, that sense of balance, of not feeling constantly overwhelmed, right?
Absolutely. And this is where Dr. Flores' approach gets really interesting. He uses the story of Maria in Chapter 1 to show how this short-circuiting can happen. Maria was the queen of multitasking, always saying yes, pushing herself to the limit. Sound familiar to anyone?
Oh, I think a lot of us can relate to Maria. I know I can. So what happens to her?
Well, she hits a wall, physically and emotionally. Burnout city. But here's where the electroespiritualidad comes in. She starts applying some of Dr. Flores' techniques. Things like setting boundaries, prioritizing self-care, reconnecting with nature, basically, consciously managing her energy flow. And slowly but surely, her system starts to rebalance.
So it's not about magically becoming immune to stress or burnout. It's about understanding our capacity and working with our energy, not against it.
Exactly. It's like we're not just passive circuits at the mercy of external forces. We have agency. We can learn to rewire ourselves to be more resilient and adaptable.
Now, that's empowering. But what about this whole spiritual structure thing? It sounds kind of abstract and intangible.
It does, doesn't it? But in Chapter 2, Dr. Flores uses this brilliant analogy of the electromagnetic field. We can't see it, but its effects are undeniable. Just think about a compass always pointing north because of Earth's magnetic field, even though we can't see that field itself.
Okay, that makes sense. So our spiritual core is like this invisible force that influences everything else, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Precisely. And just like a weak magnetic field can be easily disrupted, our spiritual core can get eclipsed by the demands of modern life, leading to that sense of purposelessness that a lot of people feel.
Which reminds me of Viktor Frankl's work on the importance of meaning and purpose for human well-being. So we're seeing this convergence of ideas from psychology and spirituality, all pointing towards the same thing, this deep-seated need for something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. And Dr. Flores doesn't just leave us hanging with this abstract idea of a spiritual core. He gives us practical ways to strengthen it, things like meditation, connecting with nature, creative expression.
So it's about finding those practices that resonate with our unique wiring and help us tune in to that deeper part of ourselves.
Exactly. And as you read, did any of those practices particularly jump out at you?
The idea of creative expression as a way to tap into that spiritual energy really intrigued me. I always felt most alive when I'm creating something, writing, playing music, even just brainstorming new ideas.
That's fascinating. And it speaks to the idea that our spiritual core isn't some separate esoteric thing. It's interwoven with everything we do. Even seemingly mundane activities can become a source of connection and purpose when we approach them with that intention.
Okay, so we're starting to see this framework emerge where these complex circuits with this often neglected but incredibly resilient spiritual core. And by understanding those two things, we can start making choices that optimize our entire system. It's like we're becoming our own energy managers.
Exactly. And that's where the concept of flow comes in, which Dr. Flores dives into in Chapter 3. He compares it to Corriente electrica, literally, the electrical current.
Now, this is where those parallels get really interesting. He talks about electrons being like our thoughts and emotions constantly buzzing around, and our nervous system is like the wiring that carries those impulses throughout our body.
It's a powerful image, right? And when that current is flowing smoothly, unimpeded, that's when we experience that state of flow. Ideas are clicking, we're fully immersed in the moment, and things just seem to effortlessly fall into place.
It's like that feeling of being in the zone, right? Where time seems to disappear and you're completely absorbed in what you're doing.
Exactly. But just like in an electrical circuit, things can get blocked. Stress, distractions, negative self-talk, they create resistance, disrupting the flow of energy. And when that happens, we feel it, that sense of stagnation, that lack of clarity, that feeling of being stuck.
And Dr. Flores argues that this is something you especially resonate with, that desire for efficiency and focus in your life. So how do we bust through those blocks and get back into the flow?
Well, Dr. Flores offers a range of strategies in Chapter 3, and I'm curious, as you read, which ones stood out to you?
Honestly, so many of them resonated. It's like he gets me. Mindfulness, for one, that's been a game changer in terms of noticing when I'm getting caught up in distractions.
It's like decluttering those mental pathways, right?
Right.
Creating more space for that energy to flow. And Dr. Flores also talks about creative expression as a way to unblock those channels. What are your thoughts on that?
It makes so much sense. It's like when I'm stuck on a problem and I step away to paint or play music, the solution often seems to appear out of thin air. It's like those creative pursuits are tapping into a different part of my brain, allowing those stuck circuits to reset.
Exactly. And it highlights how interconnected all these aspects of ourselves are. It's not just about mental focus. It's about finding those activities that allow our energy to flow freely, whether it's through movement, music, or any form of creative expression.
This is giving me so much to think about. Now, chapter 4 dives into this idea of conductivity. But it's not just about how well we conduct electricity. It's about our openness to new experiences, ideas, perspectives, basically, our willingness to learn and grow.
And here's where Dr. Flores links it directly to personal growth. He suggests the more conductive we are, the more readily we absorb new information, adapt to change, and expand our understanding of the world.
Which makes me think about my own drive for knowledge. It's like that thirst for learning, for seeing things from multiple angles, that's conductivity in action.
Precisely. And on the flip side, he talks about limiting beliefs as being like insulators, those rigid ways of thinking that prevent us from making new connections and seeing new possibilities.
And he illustrates this with the story of Lucia in chapter 4, right? She was stuck in this rut, afraid to try new things, convinced she wasn't good enough to go after her dreams. It was like she was trapped in her own little insulated box.
And what's fascinating is that her turning point came when she finally started questioning those beliefs that were holding her back. She realized that her fear of failure was actually a form of resistance, preventing her from reaching her full potential.
So how did she break through that resistance?
It started with a shift in perspective. Instead of focusing on all the ways she might fail, she started asking herself, what if I succeed? That simple question helped her reframe her fear and start seeing possibilities where before she had only seen obstacles.
That's such a powerful reminder that we often limit ourselves with our own thoughts and beliefs, but we have the power to change those thoughts, to rewire those limiting patterns.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that brings us to Chapter 5, where Dr. Flores tackles the concept of resistance head on. Now, it might seem counterintuitive to think of resistance as a positive thing, especially in the context of personal growth, where we're often encouraged to push past our comfort zones.
Yeah, when I first saw the title of the chapter, Resistencia Electrica, I thought, wait a minute, isn't resistance the enemy?
It's a natural assumption. But just like in an electrical circuit, some resistance is essential for things to function properly. It's about finding that sweet spot, enough resistance to regulate the flow of energy, but not so much that it creates a blockage.
Okay, that makes sense in terms of electricity, but how does that apply to us?
Think about it like this. If we said yes to every opportunity, every request, every invitation, we'd quickly burn ourselves out. We need to be able to set boundaries, to say no to things that drain our energy or don't align with our values. That's a form of healthy resistance.
So sometimes saying no is actually a way of protecting our energy and preserving our capacity for the things that truly matter.
Exactly. And Dr. Flores gives the example of Jose in this chapter. Jose was a talented artist who had completely stopped painting because of a crippling fear of failure. Every time he picked up a brush, his inner critic would start bombarding him with doubts and negative self-talk.
It sounds like his fear had become a form of resistance, preventing him from accessing his creativity and sharing his gifts with the world. So How did he overcome it?
Well, it wasn't about magically erasing his fear overnight. It was about learning to acknowledge it, to sit with the discomfort of those feelings without letting them control him. He started small, just sketching for a few minutes each day, giving himself permission to create without judgment. And slowly, as he built up his tolerance for those uncomfortable feelings, he found that the resistance started to lessen.
It's like he was gradually rewiring those neural pathways, proving to himself that he could handle the discomfort of putting his work out there.
Exactly. And it highlights this crucial point. We have more agency than we realize. We can choose to strengthen our resistance when it comes to things that drain us or hold us back. And we can consciously work on reducing the resistance that keeps us from pursuing our goals and living in alignment with our values.
That's so empowering. Okay, so we've talked about currents, flow, conductivity, and resistance. What's next in this electrospiritual journey?
Well, Chapter 6 takes us into the realm of Ohm's law. Now, before you roll your eyes and say physics alert, I promise this is where it gets really practical.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity. Break it down for me. How does Ohm's law apply to personal growth?
Essentially, Ohm's law states that the current in a circuit is directly proportional to the voltage and inversely proportional to the resistance. In simpler terms, the more oomph you have, that's the voltage, the more easily things will flow. But if there's a lot of resistance, even a strong voltage will struggle to push through.
Okay, I'm following so far. But how does this translate to, say, achieving our goals or making positive changes in our lives?
Think of it this way. Voltage, in our case, is our effort, our motivation, the energy we're putting towards something. The current represents the actual flow of progress, the results we're seeing. And, as we've already discussed, resistance is all those internal and external barriers that get in the way.
So if we're really fired up about a project, that's high voltage. But if we're simultaneously dealing with a ton of self-doubt or external obstacles, that's high resistance.
Exactly. And according to Ohm's law, that high resistance will make it harder to see progress, even if we're putting in a lot of effort. So it's not just about working harder, it's about working smarter by strategically addressing those points of resistance. Dr. Flores gives a great example in this chapter of Marta, who's working hard but not getting the recognition she deserves at work.
High voltage, high resistance, classic case of spinning her wheels.
Precisely. So she has to figure out where that resistance is coming from. Is it a lack of visibility? Maybe she needs to be more proactive, take on leadership roles, network more effectively. Or is it a skills gap? Maybe she needs to invest in some professional development, bolster her expertise in a particular area. The key takeaway is that sometimes it's not enough to just increase our effort voltage. We also need to address those points of resistance that are holding us back.
It's like we're learning to be our own electricians, troubleshooting our lives and optimizing our energy flow for maximum impact.
I love that analogy. Now, Chapter 7 is where things get really exciting because it's all about power potentia electrica. And in this context, we're not talking about power over others, but rather our own personal power to create the lives we desire.
Okay, I'm all ears. How does Dr. Flores define personal power within this electrical framework?
He starts by defining power in the electrical sense. It's the rate at which energy is being used or generated. So a high-powered device is using a lot of energy to do its thing, whether it's a light bulb shining brightly or a motor turning quickly.
Okay, so how do we translate that to personal power? Is it just about having a ton of energy and drive?
It's more nuanced than that. Think of your motivation and purpose as the voltage, your actions as the current, and the actual results you're seeing, the impact you're making, that's your personal power. It's the outcome of all that energy being channeled effectively.
So it's not enough to just be busy and productive. It's about making sure those actions are aligned with something meaningful, something that truly lights us up.
Exactly. Dr. Flores uses the story of Roberto, a talented engineer who felt unfulfilled in his corporate job, to illustrate this point.
That's the one where he ends up quitting his job to pursue his passion for renewable energy, right?
That's the one. Roberto is a great example of someone who was living below his power potential. He had the voltage, the drive, the skills, the intelligence, but it wasn't being channeled towards something he truly cared about.
So it was like all that energy was going to waste powering something that didn't resonate with his core values.
Precisely. And once he made that shift, aligning his actions with his passion for renewable energy, it's like his whole system lit up. He found a new level of fulfillment, his work became more impactful, and he was able to make a real difference in the world.
Okay, I'm getting chills. So how do we tap into that level of power and purpose? What's the secret?
Dr. Flores argues that it starts with clarity. Clarity about our values, our passions, our unique gifts. What are those things that make us feel most alive, most energized, most like ourselves? Once we have that clarity, it becomes easier to direct our energy towards those pursuits that truly light us up.
It's like we're becoming more intentional with our energy, making sure it's not just powering any old light bulb, but rather illuminating the path that feels most authentic to us.
Beautifully said. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of personal power efficiency. Just like in an electrical circuit, we can lose energy through inefficient wiring or faulty connections. In our own lives, those energy leaks often show up as distractions, procrastination, negative self-talk, or any habits or patterns that drain our energy and prevent us from operating at our best.
So it's not just about having a lot of energy, it's about making sure we're not wasting it on things that don't serve us.
Exactly. Dr. Flores talks about the importance of becoming aware of our own personal energy leaks and finding ways to plug them. This might look like setting boundaries around our time and energy, creating systems and structures that support our goals, or developing mindfulness practices that help us stay present and focused.
This is making me think about those times when I get sucked into the black hole of social media or find myself procrastinating on important tasks. It's like those activities are literally draining my energy, leaving me feeling depleted and discouraged.
That's a perfect example. And what's fascinating is that Dr. Flores also highlights the power of service as a way to amplify our personal power. He suggests that when we use our energy to make a positive impact on the world around us, it creates this beautiful feedback loop. Not only are we contributing to something bigger than ourselves, but we're also energizing ourselves in the process.
It's like that feeling you get when you volunteer your time or help someone in need. It's both draining and energizing at the same time. It's like you're tapping into a source of power that's greater than your own individual energy.
Exactly. And that brings us to a crucial aspect of our electro-spiritual nature that Dr. Flores explores in Chapter 8, our capacity for holding and processing emotional energy. He uses the analogy of a capacitor to illustrate this concept.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this capacitor analogy.
So in an electrical circuit, a capacitor is like a little storage unit for electrical energy. It can build up a charge, hold onto it for a while, and then release it when needed.
Okay, I'm picturing a tiny battery or something, but how does that relate to our emotions?
Just like a capacitor, we all have a certain capacity to hold and process emotional energy. We experience a range of emotions throughout the day: joy, sadness, anger, excitement, and those emotions carry an energetic charge.
So you're saying we're like walking capacitors, constantly absorbing and releasing emotional energy.
Exactly. And just like a capacitor can reach a point of overload, we can too. If we're not careful, we can find ourselves emotionally flooded, overwhelmed by the intensity of our feelings.
It's like that feeling of being completely overwhelmed, where you just want to crawl into bed and pull the covers over your head, or when you find yourself snapping at loved ones over minor things because you're carrying around so much pent-up stress and frustration.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that Dr. Flores doesn't advocate for suppressing or avoiding those emotions. He recognizes that they're a natural part of the human experience. But he emphasizes the importance of developing healthy coping mechanisms, tools, and practices that help us process those emotions effectively so they don't end up short-circuiting our system.
So it's about learning to manage our emotional energy, just like we would manage any other resource.
Precisely. And just like a capacitor can release its energy in a controlled and measured way, we too can learn to process our emotions in a way that feels safe and manageable. This might look like talking to a trusted friend or therapist, journaling, engaging in creative expression, or practicing mindfulness techniques that help us observe our emotions without getting swept away by them.
This is making me think about those times when I've tried to bottle up my emotions, hoping they'll just magically disappear. Inevitably, they always seem to bubble up in unhealthy ways. Either I end up having an emotional outburst, or I start experiencing physical symptoms like headaches or digestive issues.
That's a common experience.
Mhm.
And it highlights how important it is to acknowledge and process those emotions, rather than trying to suppress them. Dr. Flores emphasizes that just like we wouldn't ignore a physical injury, we shouldn't ignore our emotional well-being either.
So we need to be as kind and compassionate with ourselves emotionally as we would be physically.
Exactly. And that includes recognizing that we all have different capacities for holding emotional energy. Some people are naturally more sensitive or empathetic, and that's okay. It's about knowing our own limits and practicing self-care to prevent emotional overload.
This is making me realize that I often compare my own emotional capacity to others, which can lead to feelings of inadequacy or shame. Like, why can't I just shake it off like so-and-so? But the truth is, We're all wired differently, and what matters most is finding what works for us.
That's such an important insight. And it speaks to the heart of Dr. Flores' message. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to personal growth. What matters most is developing self-awareness, experimenting with different tools and techniques, and finding what resonates with our unique wiring.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. So we've explored how we can optimize our energy flow, manage our emotional charges, and even tap into our personal power. Where do we go from here in our electro-spiritual exploration?
Well, in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore how this concept of electroespiritualidad extends beyond ourselves, influencing our relationships, our interactions with the world, and even our sense of purpose and connection to something greater than ourselves.
I'm so ready for more. This is blowing my mind wide open. Okay, we are back. And after that last section, I am really curious about how this whole electro-spiritualidad thing plays out in our relationships. Because let's be real, those can be some of the most energizing, AD draining parts of life.
You're telling me. And Dr. Flores dives right into that in Chapter 9. He introduces this concept, electromagnetic induction, which sounds super complicated.
Yeah, I'm getting physics flashbacks, but hopefully it's a little less intimidating this time around.
Definitely. Think of it this way. Just like a magnet creates this invisible field around it, we're creating these fields of energy too, through our thoughts, emotions, even our actions. And those fields can influence the people around us.
Okay, so like if I'm constantly stressed and anxious, that's going to have a ripple effect on my family, my coworkers, even the barista taking my coffee order.
It's true, those vibes are contagious. But here's the good news. It works both ways. When we're cultivating positive energy, joy, gratitude, peace that's radiating outwards too, influencing those around us just as powerfully.
Okay, that makes me think about those friends who always seem to uplift me just by being around them. It's like their energy is literally contagious.
Exactly. And this isn't just some mystical thing. There's actual science to back it up. Our emotions have a measurable impact on our physiology, our heart rate, our brain waves, our hormones. And those physiological changes can subtly influence the people we interact with.
So it's not just about being positive vibes only all the time. It's about recognizing that we have a responsibility to manage our energy, not just for ourselves, but for the impact it's having on others.
Precisely. And this is especially important when we consider those closest to us, our partners, family, close friends. Dr. Flores dedicates Chapter 10 to exploring these dynamics through the lens of electrical circuits specifically, series circuits versus parallel circuits.
Ooh, okay. Back to the circuits. Remind me how those work again.
So a series circuit is like a single pathway for the current to flow through. If one component breaks down, the whole thing goes out. A parallel circuit, on the other hand, has multiple pathways. So if one connection is broken, the energy can still flow through other routes.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this applies to relationships. So a really intense codependent relationship where both people are completely reliant on each other for their emotional well-being, that would be like a series circuit.
Exactly. And while those types of relationships can be incredibly fulfilling and intense, they also carry a higher risk. Because if one person is struggling, it can throw the entire system off balance.
Whereas a parallel circuit relationship would be more like a healthy friendship where you support each other, but you also have your own independent lives, interests, and support systems. So if one person is going through a tough time, it doesn't derail the entire connection.
Precisely. And Dr. Flores isn't saying one type of relationship is inherently better than the other. It's about recognizing that we need a balance of both series and deep parallel connections in our lives.
That makes so much sense. We need those deep interconnected bonds, but we also need a diverse web of support, friends, family, mentors to provide different types of energy and support.
Exactly. It's about diversifying our energy portfolio, so to speak. And it's also about being mindful of the type of energy we're bringing to our relationships. Are we showing up as an energy drain constantly needing to be recharged? Or are we offering support, encouragement, and positive vibes?
That's a powerful question to ask ourselves. Now, I'm curious about this whole finding your purpose thing, because it feels like a whole other layer of this electro-spiritualidad thing.
It is. And that's the focus of Chapter 11, Resonance. Dr. Flores uses the analogy of resonant frequency from physics, which is basically...
Okay, hold on. I vaguely remember that from science class, but can you give me a refresher?
Of course. So every object has a natural resonant frequency. It's the frequency at which it vibrates with the most amplitude, with the least resistance. Think of a tuning fork. When you strike it, it vibrates at a specific frequency, and if you hold another tuning fork with the same frequency nearby, it will start to vibrate too, even though you didn't directly strike it.
Oh, right. It's like that energy is just transferring through the air, and those matching frequencies amplify each other.
Exactly. And Dr. Flores suggests that we have these spiritual frequencies too, a unique set of values, passions, and talents that resonate most deeply with our true selves.
So when we're living in alignment with those things, when our actions are aligned with our values, when we're pursuing our passions, when we're using our natural talents, that's when we're vibrating at our resonant frequency.
Precisely. And when that happens, it's like magic. We have more energy, we're more productive, we're more magnetic to opportunities that align with our purpose, and we experience a deep sense of fulfillment and joy. It's like we're plugged into a source of limitless power.
It's giving me chills just thinking about it. But what about those times when it feels like we've totally lost our frequency? Like we're off key, out of tune, and unsure of where to even begin to find our way back.
That's where the concept of dissonance comes in. Dr. Flores suggests that negative thoughts, limiting beliefs, energy-draining habits, and even external distractions can create dissonance, throwing us off our resonant frequency and leaving us feeling stuck, drained, and uninspired.
So it's like those times when we're constantly second-guessing ourselves, focusing on what we don't have instead of what we do, or allowing other people's opinions to dictate our choices. It's like all that negativity creates static in our system, making it harder for our true frequency to shine through.
Exactly. And just like a musician needs to retune their instrument to get back in harmony, we need to find ways to address those sources of dissonance and get back in sync with our purpose.
So it's about becoming aware of those thoughts, beliefs, and habits that are creating static in our system, and then consciously choosing to shift them.
Precisely. And this is where those practices we talked about earlier come in. Mindfulness, meditation, journaling, creative expression, they can help us become more aware of our thoughts and feelings, release those that are no longer serving us, and rewire those limiting patterns that are keeping us stuck.
It's like we're fine-tuning our inner instruments, so to speak. Now, I love how Dr. Flores doesn't just focus on this individual journey of finding our purpose and aligning with our frequency. He also talks about the power of collective resonance. What does he mean by that?
He suggests that just like those tuning forks amplifying each other's vibrations, when people come together with a shared purpose, their frequencies can amplify each other, creating a powerful force for change. Think about social movements, community initiatives, or even just a group of friends supporting each other's dreams. Their combined energy can create a ripple effect that extends far beyond themselves.
That's so powerful. It's like when you're at a concert and the entire crowd is singing along to the same song, and you can feel this incredible surge of energy in the air. It's almost tangible.
Exactly. And it highlights the interconnected nature of our energy. We're not just isolated circuits. We're part of this larger web of energy, influencing and being influenced by the frequencies around us.
Okay, so we've talked about optimizing our energy flow, managing our emotional charges, finding our resonant frequency, and even amplifying our energy through collective resonance. What's the final piece of the puzzle in this electro-spiritual journey?
Dr. Flores ends the book with a concept that I think ties everything together beautifully, grounding, or tierra in Spanish. And he uses the analogy of electrical grounding to illustrate its importance.
Okay, I'm picturing those three-pronged plugs we have here, but
Okay.
how does that translate to grounding ourselves spiritually or emotionally?
Just like an electrical system needs to be grounded to function safely and efficiently, we need to be grounded in something larger than ourselves to feel stable, centered, and connected. It's about finding that sense of rootedness, that inner stability that allows us to weather life's storms without getting swept away by every passing thought or emotion.
So what are some practical ways we can cultivate that sense of grounding?
Dr. Flores talks about the importance of connecting with nature, spending time in quiet reflection, engaging in spiritual practices that resonate with us, and nurturing relationships that provide a sense of belonging and support.
So it's about plugging in to those sources of energy that replenish and revitalize us, whether it's the grounding energy of the earth, the stillness of meditation, the support of loved ones, or the awe and wonder of connecting with something larger than ourselves.
Beautifully said. And when we're grounded, it doesn't mean that life's challenges magically disappear, but we're able to meet them with more grace, resilience, and inner peace. It's like we have this strong foundation to stand on, even when the winds of change are swirling around us.
This has been such an incredible journey. We've covered so much ground, from understanding ourselves as complex electrical circuits to exploring how we can optimize our energy flow, manage our emotional charges, connect with our purpose, and ground ourselves in something larger than ourselves. It's like Electroespiritualidad gives us this whole new language for understanding ourselves and the world around us.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And for you listening, what's resonating most deeply right now? What's one small circuit adjustment you might experiment with this week, inspired by Electroespiritualidad? Keep that question buzzing in your mind. Until next time, may your circuits be clear, your energy vibrant, and your purpose fully illuminated.